I'm absolutely delighted to welcome you all here today. My name is Jane Finsale, and I am lucky enough to be the Chief Exec here at Working Families. We are an organisation that is looking after working parents and carers. Our mission is to remove the barriers that working parents and carers face in the workplace. And we do that in three separate ways. We have a free legal advice line for working parents and carers who want to keep their jobs. That's what they tell us they want to do, to encourage them to have those open conversations with their line managers. We support employers, and we've got some of those employers here on the call today, which is brilliant, to help them create, sustain family-friendly and flexible organisations and workplaces. And then finally, we do everything we can to influence policy change. So this week, this National Work Life Week, we've run a couple of polls, and we found that 1/5 of parents, 1/5 of working parents don't have flexible working arrangements in place. Over half have said they wouldn't go for a job that didn't offer explicit flexibility. And obviously that has really serious implications for low productivity. If you're not moving on because you're too scared to leave where you are because you're getting the flexibility that you need. We know, of course, that parents want to be the best parents they can be, but people also want to do a good job at work. So it's all about getting flexible solutions that will work both for the individual, for the organisation, and of course for the role people are in. And our brilliant panelists today know all of that. They're going to share that with you based on their insights and their expertise. And our panelists are Mike Bambrook, who's the Head of Performance and Programme Management, Public Policy and Corporate Responsibility at Barclays. Sam Skerry, who's the SVP for Mergers and Acquisitions and Business Development at BP, and Suzanne Jacobs, an organisational behaviour and performance expert. But firstly, I'm absolutely thrilled to hand over to Becca, who is our new ambassador. She's the author and is an antenatal and parenting expert. Some of you, many of you, will know her from A Mother Place, an unabashed look at the realities of pregnancy and parenthood. And so I am going to hand over to Becca. Over to you, Becca.
Thanks, Jane. Hi, everyone. I'm Becca Mabley, and I'm founder of A Mother Place, which is a network which supports women and their families at any stage of their parenting journey, right through from pregnancy to, I have people who I'm talking to who are grandparents who are looking back on their journeys now. It's a safe space to discuss all the things which traditionally felt like taboo, like not loving every moment, not being able to breastfeed, the mental load, mental health, going back to work, not going back to work, you name it, we talk about it. And I set it up 13 years ago after the birth of my first child, in response to the fact that I was really prepared for my pregnancy and my birth and all that kind of stuff, but it was what came afterwards which felt like a huge shock. And I was absolutely furious that nobody had told me how hard it was to be a parent. And I felt really kind of foolish and also really lonely in those early years. And I want to make sure that those coming behind me don't have to feel the same. And I'm really pleased to be working with working families to help support those who need and who deserve to work more flexibly, because I've experienced firsthand how important it's been for my family. And I'm really passionate about helping other families experience this too. So thank you for inviting me to moderate today. And, I hope everybody enjoys the panel. I would love to hand over to our panel, who are going to take 10 minutes each to speak on our theme today, which is how to lead flex from the front, engaging and empowering your senior management team in how to foster flexible, family-friendly workplaces. So first up, we've got Mike Bambrook, Head of Performance and Programme Management, Public Policy and Corporate Responsibility at Barclays, who's going to share his insights and experiences as a senior leader, juggling his career with being a busy parent and a senior role model for family-friendly working. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you, and again, thank you for the chance to take part in this today, and well done both of you for not mangling my job title or the name of my function, which are both a bit of a mouthful. So yeah, by way of introduction, I've been at Barclays 25 years. I started in technology in what was then Barclays Capital, had a series of technology roles, spent a bit of time in software procurement as well, and I'm now in this role. It's essentially a corporate affairs function for shorthand. And yeah, my leadership role, I've got a great team around me. We're responsible for budget and workforce management for that function, technology project delivery, and driving simplification. And it really feels great to be kind of at the center of such an important function in what Barclays is trying to do. Then I've been a dad for 17 years. So William is in his last year at school now, and is looking at the next step to university. We've been off doing what are they called, open days, and I'm so proud of the increasingly mature and confident young man that he's becoming, and seeing how he's learning to trust his own judgment in what's the right next step for himself. And then I've got James, who's 13, an age when you might think stereotypical teenage behaviour is going to kick in, but he's still full of life, energetic, joyful, but also very grounded and very accepting of whatever life throws at him. So I joined what was then the Parents and Family Network for Barclays Capital when William was quite young, and it was a way to meet and hear from colleagues, other colleagues with families, working mums and dads, to share stories and tips, and attend the occasional event, and that was great. I've always valued that. I've been more actively involved in what's become an employee resource group for the whole of Barclays for several years now. And I've had the privilege to be one of a small team of co-chairs for nearly 3 years now. And we're really proud to have 7,000 members across dozens, literally, of Barclays campuses, offices and branches across the UK. So when I think about how to build that supportive, inclusive and family-friendly workplace, I think all those experiences and influences that I've had in my working life come together. I think back to my line manager when I first became a dad, when I was in technology. Steve was great. He was up and down at times in terms of the workload. We were a hard-working team, but he set a great example. He actually had kids and stepkids himself, but kind of 5 o'clock would come round and he'd say, right, I'm off home. Are you coming with me? And we'd literally walk out of the door together. That was a very good influence, I thought. I didn't mean sometimes we might not be checking into things when we got home in the evening, or sometimes there's a need to work different hours. But as a benchmark, that was really helpful. I started working from home. Started off one day a fortnight on a Friday, typically, which evolved into once a week, but long before it was fashionable. But in the beginning, actually, it was for good business reasons. It was easier to do some confidential work I was doing at the time on a screen at home rather than in a shared office. And as my role changed, I did have some anxiety about maintaining support for working from home at the time, one day a week, through changing roles and line managers, but it has largely been okay. A couple were skeptical at first, but I've always been able to make it work and show that I'm productive, I'm able to engage and fulfill my role properly when I've been working from home. And I've always had some kind of ground rules myself around that, which I think support that. And I say that kind of my experience of working in a culture that has largely supported that has largely been positive over the years as my sons have grown, and now my mum is at an age where she needs my support from time to time. But then of course the pandemic lockdown and the subsequent return to office working, it's changed expectations around how much time we spend together in the office, how we use that time to be effective, how we stay in touch with each other when we're in the office and when we're not, and how we collaborate and support each other through both of those ways of working. I do recognise though that as a professional, a white collar professional, effectively working in an office in Canary Wharf, it's a privilege, and it certainly isn't possible for all roles and employers and types of work. So then I think the framework of policy and guidance that we've talked about, that's important. Obviously, we have legislation. We have the more formal employer policies, which support family-friendly and flexible working to a greater or lesser degree, depending on where you are. But then I think workplace culture obviously plays a big role in that, and that's the personal instincts of colleagues and people leaders are so important. And here I think the employee resource group, the ERG, has a role to play in bringing people together, in sharing stories of people who've lived through various experiences as working parents or carers, and in providing some support, some resources, some safe spaces for colleagues to share their stories and to be the voice of colleagues within the organisation. And when we do hear from colleagues about their experiences of balancing work with family life or with their role as a carer, when they are positive about it, they usually reflect on the support of their line manager and their colleagues around them as being crucial to that being successful. So I think then workplace culture, at its core, it's simply the sum total of how we all behave. As a leader, I think I've learned to trust my own instincts to do the right thing. And of course, I do that within the policies and guidance that are given to me as a leader within Barclays, to make sure I'm operating within those guardrails that are set out for me. But I think if you start from a point of instinct, then you're most likely to get an outcome that works for the colleague in question, for your team, and for your business objectives. And I could perhaps illustrate that in a couple of examples that have come up over the last year or so. There's one member of my team I know has a daughter who struggles with her mental health, and the colleague came and interrupted me in a casual meeting several weeks ago now. The colleague was visibly distressed and worried about a message she'd just had from her daughter, and felt she needed to go and support her and make sure she was all right. And I said, of course, just go. Don't wait to ask. If something like that, some kind of emergency comes up, you just need to go. Be where you need to be, and we'll sort out everything else afterwards. Let me know if you can. But if you have to drop everything and go so quickly, please just go and tell me when you can. Another colleague, a member of my team who lives and is a carer for her elderly father. She's a hard worker and very loyal to the team and to Barclays. And of course, it goes without saying that if her dad, for instance, is coming home from hospital, she has to be there for him, and we work around that accordingly. We adjust working days, we adjust working patterns, and we still get the job done, and we make sure she is able to be there for her dad. And then earlier this year, we had a colleague returning to the team from maternity leave who wanted to come back on the basis of 3 days a week. Her role is one that kind of needs to be done full time, but we started from the position that we want to find a way to make it work. Again, I think it's the instinct that's important there. And when we worked out what we could do to make that work, we decided that we could do that as a job share. We were able to hire someone else to work alongside her, bring the two of them together and set really clear expectations around working days so that they would be together at least 1 day a week, and their expectations of others around them would be in line, that there's someone in the office to talk to and to interact with them as a job share, but then empowered them to work out the details together. If they're going to sit together and do a handover, or make sure they send each other emails to make sure things don't get dropped, then that was all worked out, and I think that was it's worked quite successfully. So I can see I'm just a minute left, so although I hadn't timed what I had to say, I think I'm just about done. So there, I think then, if we want to establish that workplace culture, it's all of these things to come together: people's personal experiences, influences and instincts, alongside legislation and the guardrails and guidance and everything else that we do to build up that supportive culture. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. That was really, really interesting. Thank you. We've now got Sam Skerry, who's SVP Mergers and Acquisitions and Business Development at BP. And Sam is going to be sharing some useful takeaways and strategies on how leaders have elevated and embedded family-friendly working within her organisation. Thanks, Sam.
Hi, Becca. Thank you. Mike, it was great hearing your comments. I've got so many reflections on that. So, so I'm Sam. I've been with BP actually just over 25 years. I actually began work. I might get a tick in the box from Becca and Jane, because I began work in the early days in HR, and then went into a commercial career. I spent 16 of the years I've had in running trading organisations, and then went on to run our corporate venture capital unit, and I'm now in the M&A and business development area, so commercial roles ever since. But I do think that early time in HR gave me quite a grounding, actually, in some of the things we're talking about here. Long before I had a family, so outside of work. I'm married, I have 2 boys, had them a little bit later, so they're only 4 and 7. I'm at the opposite end of the scale to Mike, and with the challenges that come with them. So my youngest has just gone into reception, the eldest just gone into year 3, and who knew, because I don't remember, that's quite a big step up in terms of independence and so on. So we're learning that journey right now. And then the other thing I would mention, because I think it features, is we're a dual career family, and so my husband also works, and so we're balancing that between the 2 of us, and with an added dimension that, as many people in today's world, we don't live near family. So that means when we're thinking about support, we're having to engineer and think about that support around the roles that we have, and then what the boys need and what we want to do for them in life. So that's a bit about who we are. I thought I would talk a bit today about, so what does BP do to support working families? Then some of what do I do in my role as a leader in the organisation, some of the things that I have done personally for the people that work in the teams that I have led over time and am leading now. M&A in particular is quite a busy and hectic team in terms of the work for the people that lead on the transactions that we're working, and business development the same. Not always theoretically conducive to family life, you might have thought, but actually we're trying to do quite a lot around that in the way that we work within the team and the flexibility that we can give around those roles. And then I thought I'd add just some personal reflections in the end in terms of strategies and the things that I'm doing in my life, in balancing this. So I think, what does BP do? I have seen this grow in terms of the proliferation of things and the menu of things that we have to support working families in the time that I've been with the company. And I'm actually really proud of the things that we do offer. And, it ranges from things like fertility treatment support. That's a super stressful time before you even are a parent. So support on fertility treatment for you and your partner, maternity and paternity and adoption leave, they're the classic things, but so important to get right and to support people to take them, not just to say we offer paternity leave, but actually giving people the physical break from work to take it, not expecting them to actually stay plugged in. Child time leave. This one I think is quite amazing. So for anyone with children up to the age of 3, you can take, in BP's policies, 6 weeks of paid and full benefits time off until the children are 3 years old. It's near and dear to my heart, that one, because I didn't know about it and I was eligible for it with my second son. So one of the things, and I'll talk about it in a moment, I do a lot to promote it now actually with my teams, because those extra days you need when childcare falls through, when children are sick, life happens, actually that, it's a fantastic policy. So I love that. We offer emergency childcare days in nurseries around the offices where we work. I'm now in Mayfair, but I was based in Canary Wharf a long time. Lots of my colleagues in Canary Wharf, where Mike is, were using that. We have nurseries at some, not all of our facilities, but at some of the facilities where our offices are based. And our private healthcare extends to the full family. And it's interesting, for where my children are, I'm really focused on what that means I can access for them when I need to at the stage they're at. And I think about, things we're exploring around one of them with sight early on. But actually what I observe with my colleagues now who've got teenagers is the mental health care support that provides for them through that healthcare provider is phenomenal, because there's such a proliferation of that in teens these days. So, that is a huge benefit that people really like and is a real support for families. And then the flexible working, and what we said coming back from COVID and what we tried to work to is the 60-40 of 3 days in the office and 2 working from home. And the office is defined as working wherever you are. So my team, for example, in business development and M&A, they're often not in their main place of work, but those days, wherever they are working, meeting counterparties and others, they all count within that. So, but it's also, I think, and this comes a bit to then, if I move on and talk about, so what do I do as a leader personally? What are things I'm trying to do and have done with teams? And I think the first I would pick up on is, I think just taking the time to understand the teams you have and what's important to them from a flexible working point of view. Because we can flex quite a lot, I think, when we understand what's important to people and what they need. And I'll give an example. One of my team last year flagged to us, sometimes we have to do meetings out of hours. And she said, these are always falling right at bedtime. I've got a 2-year-old and it's right at their bedtime. And actually bedtime, much like me, my children's bedtime is sacrosanct for me. That's what I do everything I can to preserve. And it was for her, but she was a more junior employee and probably didn't feel quite that confidence to raise it. So by talking to her, either her line manager or me, we discovered a bit over time, this is what's important. And I think so, in terms of what you can do as a leader and what I expect of my senior leaders, take the time to understand what's important for individuals and where their pinch points are and what matters to them, because actually there's a lot you can do to support them when you understand it. When you're in a vacuum, the policies are there and there's way more to it than policies. So I think that's one thing. The other thing I would talk about is role modeling, and actually Mike gave a lovely example of that. And that's something that happened to me. So when I came back from my first maternity leave, I took 11 months off when I had my eldest. And when I came back, I had a meeting with my boss, who's a fantastic guy called Alan. And I met with him in that first week. And he said, so, return to work, how are you thinking about this? And I said to him, don't worry, Alan, I've got this all covered. There'll be no drop in service. I figured out I can do this, this, and this. It's going to be fine. The job's good. And he said, no, I'm thinking about something really different. And you need to be thinking about something different, which is, at the time I was leading our oil trading business for the EMEA region. And he said to me, and I had a population of about 500 people. And he said, the most important thing you do is walk out of here at the right time every night to meet your childcare needs. And so at the time we had a nanny for my children, and he said, what time do you need to leave in order to be able to get home? And I said, well, it's 5:15. And he said, well, then your challenge is it's 5:15 every night without fail, because the whole organization, whether you know it or not, is looking at you to see what is it like to be a parent in this organization, in a managerial position and in a senior managerial position. And that really resonated with me. It gave me a window into something I hadn't really appreciated in the importance of that role modeling. And it also gave me permission, and I think that's really important. It gave me permission to do it and to leave on time and to be there for my children and realize it was beneficial for others. And I actually got a lot of feedback from dads too, not just from mums, about that. So role modeling is super important. And I think the other thing I mentioned is about raising the awareness around the policies that are there. And I talked about the child time leave. So I now, about once a year, as I get new joiners into my team, I'll send out a summary of those flexible working benefits so that they're on people's radar. And I'm delighted. Lately, someone did take a month off in the team and said, actually, this is a time I want to do it and be with my young child. So that's it. And then I think lastly, because I'm almost out on time, I think there's a really important point here about if you're a parent, role modeling that it isn't easy, because anyone who thinks it is easy, it's not. Role modeling perfection, it's not helping anybody, because when reality dawns for them, they'll feel like they're failing. And I know I did in the early days. So the honesty of how tough this is actually super important.
Thank you, Sam. That was so nice. I love that last bit. And finally, we've got the brilliant Suzanne Jacobs, an organisational behaviour and performance expert who's supported many working families over the years with their training requirements. And she's going to share some top tips around how we can inspire and develop a new generation of flexible leaders.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Becca, and fantastic to be here with everybody. Yeah, I've worked with working families for, goodness, about 12 years now, I think. And it's been just a wonderful journey with them. Thank you, Sam, and thank you, Mike, so much. That gave me so much to think about, you know, that whole cultural instinct. Sam, I loved it when you said life happens. And a couple of things that really just triggered for me, part of what I want to talk about today, on a slightly different tact around flexibility, is that both of those talks that we've just had are coming from a very human aspect. Sam, that's the first time I ever hear the office equates to working wherever you are. And that's such a fantastic way of looking at that. So yeah, I want to perhaps take it on a slightly different tack. I am a behavioural scientist. I suppose that's sort of the grand title, but I wasn't always. I'm an ex-FD. Well, I'm not practicing anymore. An accountant. Was for many years. Worked for one of the big four. So my career was wonderful. You know, it spanned Europe and lots and lots and lots of wonderful people working with me. But I wanted to understand, actually, as a leader, how I could create an environment where people genuinely thrived. And for me, that took me back to education. It took me back into academia, and it took me back into actually looking at our physiology, our neurobiology, in order to be able to understand how the human being, human anatomy and physiology actually work in order to truly thrive. And in particular, looking at the workplace. So that just gives you a bit of a background in terms of me. I'm also a mum of children, one just gone off to university, one just about to start her A-levels. Both my girls are neurodiverse, which has added another dimension to working with them and supporting them over the years. I have always worked flexibly, but I've often had to force that flexibility through different choices, rather than when my first was born, the flexible working conversation wasn't really one that I could have. I absolutely feel that that's moved leaps and bounds to where we are now. But my ask was, how can we inspire and develop a new generation of flexible leaders? So I've been fascinated for a long time at how we've created workplaces and working environments that in so many cases are actually set up contrary to the way in which we are neurologically and physiologically wired to perform. And throughout my senior leadership career and my research, I've sought to really understand how to build that environment in which humans can genuinely thrive. And applying the performance science and delivering evidence tools, very fussy about that, that can be implemented easily and practically by all leaders in order to be able to create that environment. When we consider that 70% of all human behaviour is determined by the environment we find ourselves in, and within that, leaders influence 75% of the variance in engagement levels of their teams, this really brings us back to flexible working as core to a high-performance environment is ultimately a leadership issue. It can be enabled and supported by the fantastic people teams, but without our leaders understanding how to create a truly inclusive, accessible, flexible environment, it simply won't happen. Now, I work with many senior leaders and leaders at all levels across industry sectors. And despite flexible working being common policy practice, and even our laws wonderfully continuing to change to reflect the need for it, there does remain, although it's come on leaps and bounds, there remains a huge gap in what is written and what is done. And a large part of that challenge that I still see comes down to leadership capability in this space. And some prevailing myths around flexible working that place our leaders in quite an unfair situation where they don't have the knowledge or tools to establish flexibility that really allows work to work. And Sam, I really picked up on what you said. You said your manager at the time said leaders are looking at you. And it's so true. The hierarchical amplification effect of anybody in a leadership position is significant. Leaders are always on stage, what they say, what they don't say, what they do, what they don't do. So to inspire and develop our leaders is about giving them the why and the how to approach resourcing and leadership differently, using and leveraging flexibility. So I'd like to spend a little bit of time focusing on a slightly different angle of flexible working to bring you some insights into that why and the how. Now, the policies, formal arrangements and processes are all vital and very important, but I just want to put them to one side for now, because I often find in my experience, we can sometimes fall foul to the illusion that if the policy is written and the offer is good, then flexibility will simply happen. But just as Sam and Mike were saying, behavioural change doesn't work that way. We respond more to the hierarchical and social normative influence within our cultural environment than a well-written policy. Now, I hear lots of concerns when I talk about flexibility from leaders and managers, things like, if I offer flexible working, I'll open the floodgates, or if they're working from home, how will I know they're working? And these phrases still come up time and time again, but what they tell me, or phrases similar, actually gives me an indication that the manager or the leader themselves is feeling a threat to their own sense of agency. Now, they may react to try to micromanage a bit or up the surveillance, or maybe try to enforce a one location based working. So what they're trying to do is resist a shift of flexibility in order to regain their own perceived sense of control. Now, that's a behaviourally understandable response to perceived control threat, but of course we all know it only ever serves to backfire, reduce productivity and deplete motivation. But how does flexibility work really support high performance? And the key is trust. And I know you hear that word a lot, and it's used a great deal in this context, but it is the absolute foundation. And when I talk about trust, I am talking about the neurological environment that our brain needs to perform. And there is an evidence-based formula for trust. My research, alongside that of working families and other academics, has provided a science-backed recipe of 7 elements that leaders can learn and implement through practical and simple tools to establish trust and psychological safety that can be measured in real time. And one of those elements in the recipe is autonomy. Flexibility working falls firmly into our need for autonomy and a sense of influence over our day, our lives, our work, and the priorities therein. In the workplace, providing an environment of perceived choice and autonomy and control is a necessary function for high-performing teams. And we know that when autonomously functioning, people are more deeply engaged and productive, and in fact, are far more likely to connect to achieve a central purpose. We face an ever-increasing challenge of integrating the most important parts of our lives with work. Flexible working, as we all know, is not just about one demographic of the workforce, nor it is just about reduced contractual hours, and it certainly isn't about reduced commitment. In fact, the research shows when implemented well, it increases commitment. Flexibility is, just as the word describes, an approach to work that supports choice and autonomy, affording a sense of control to the individual to integrate all aspects of their lives, including work. So in terms of that why, to answer my question, how does flexible working really support high performance? Simply, a culture of trust that leverages flexible working as a core strategy triggers our reward neurocircuitry, which is the seat of intrinsic motivation, which leads to higher performance, engagement, and well-being, among other effects. So I want to bring another perspective now to the direct link between flexibility, performance, and well-being. We all know that we experienced a huge shift during COVID that forced remote working, and since then we've had this rebalancing to hybrid working. But in many, many organisations, we're still not working wisely with the tools that we have. I am a great fan of hybrid working as a form of flexible working, but only when we use the tools of our time, space, and place effectively. And when we give leaders that understanding of how to do that, we can really shift to a truly flexible environment. So just to give you an understanding a little bit around this, our offices are a place tool for working, but not all work. Both Sam and Mike have alluded to that. I absolutely believe and know the evidence behind the uplift in connection and a sense of belonging through face-to-face interaction. We are social creatures, and our communication is mainly conveyed through social cues such as micro-expressions, tone of voice, rather than just our words. And remote working, online connection, reduces our ability to tune into these social cues, which makes connection harder, yes. But let's use out of office and in office for their best advantage. So mentoring, performance discussions, creative exploration, and so on are all examples of work that are simply more effective when we're together. But then there's the work that requires focus and concentration. Mike, you spoke about this. We cannot, neurologically, physiologically, we cannot multitask with our cognitive attention. And intricate, deep work is better done with minimal distractions. In fact, with distraction, we are around 25% less efficient. And your decision-making and quality of work reduces by the equivalent around 10 IQ points. It's referred to as the cognitive cost of switching. So if we're able to bring this in and use the place, including the office, wisely to achieve the best outcomes for the type of work being undertaken, it makes sense. That's good, flexible, hybrid working. And there's so much more I could bring you around what flexible working really does to use place, space, and time wisely. So the ask was, how can we inspire and develop a new generation of flexible leaders? And my answer is about giving new and experienced leaders at all levels the knowledge, the tools, and the know-how to implement good flexible working and hybrid working for all. The tools are simple, and they put them back into a leadership position where they are influencing a positive culture and an inclusive environment. Flexibility is crucial to human leadership, so let's equip our leaders with this new era of work to be chief environmental officers for their teams, so we truly resource humans. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Suzanne. That was absolutely fascinating. Thank you. And thanks, everybody. I would love to open the discussion session. We've got loads of great questions. I don't know if we'll have time to get to all of them, but if I read out some of the ones that we have received, and then Suzanne, Sam, and Mike, perhaps I could invite you guys to raise your hand if you would like to help answer some of the questions. So the first one we have is, there's a big push to get people back into the workplace now, which I think will put working parents on the back foot again. What advice would you give to working parents who need that flexibility of hybrid working, 2 or 3 days a week in the office, for example, but cannot make 4 or 5 days in the office work? Should we be making formal flexible working requests? Any other advice?
Shall we jump in, or?
Yes, Suzanne, if you take this one, that'd be great.
So it is a really interesting shift that I've been witnessing over the last few months or so. When we talk about autonomy and working within the office and out of the office, that dictate, as it's taken by some, of the sort of the enforced back into the office. I appreciate that there's a good intention behind it, but actually it can shift and damage motivation. What we really need to do is give teams themselves, and leaders particularly, the tools to be able to know how to actually use that time, place, and space wisely. So they're looking at jobs and making sure that tasks are supported across the individuals that they have, and being placed so that work is done in the right place at the right time with the right space. That's got to be done at team basis. And it's got to include the ability to be able to connect at the right time with each other. It is vital, but we've got to be able to allow teams to be able to resource that themselves and work that out.
Thank you, that's great. Mike, I've got a question here for you. Your insights were fantastic, and I really relate to the instinct you talk about in colleagues and those with line management responsibilities when supporting those with parental carer and other life responsibilities. How can we recognise or reward that, given the huge value add?
Interesting. Thank you. I think there, if we talk about kind of recognition and reward, I wouldn't, as a working parent, expect to be kind of formally recognised or rewarded through my work in Barclays. But I think actually the most important thing we can do is just make it the norm to talk about these things. I make a point of talking about what's going on with my family in my daily life at work with my team, and with other people around me, so that people know that I'm a working dad, and and I encourage others to do the same, and you're kind of normalizing it in that way, I think. So and I like that you've picked up, Heather, in your question, parental and carer, and I saw a question further down around carers, and as a employee resource group, we're very much about working parents and working carers. We say that families come in all shapes and sizes, and everybody belongs to a family, so we're very broad in that respect, and we certainly encourage anybody, any colleague who's kind of actively engaging in that agenda through supporting our ERG to make sure they're talking about that with their colleagues and with their line managers, to make sure that that effort that they make, that additional passion and energy that they bring to their employment and their role as a colleague is recognised. But I think actually just the most important thing is to just normalise talking about it. Yeah.
Thank you, Mike. I really like that. Yeah, normalising it, I think, is a big part of all of this, isn't it? I've got a question. Maybe Sam, you might have some thoughts on this. Now that people are being monitored about how many days they're in the office, how would you advise dealing with people who want to work from home more in the school holidays to manage the juggle of camps, etc.? Is this a formal, flexible working request, given the monitoring of being in the office goes to senior leaders?
That's an interesting one. I think, so how I would approach it, and I think, every organisation has a different approach to how formal they want to be about these things. But, I think, as I was saying, for my team, I tend to think about, wherever you're working is your working day. It doesn't have to be physically in this office, for that kind of 60-40 that we have. But similarly, I'm quite okay if people want to shift their time between months. I get that in a summer holiday period, you might want to be there more. But I do think it also comes back to the needs of the job. So, I would say, as always, Mike said it starts with communication. You need really good open communication on both sides. And by that, I mean line manager and employee, to say, an employee, find the voice to be able to say, this is what I need, this is what would be helpful for me, here's what I could accommodate maybe in different weeks, but here is what I would like to have in those school holiday weeks. And then as a line manager, to really challenge yourself, and everyone's going to be doing it with the new legislation, I'm glad to see, challenging yourself to really consider it and say, what would it take to make that work? So that formal monitoring, as an organisation, do you really need to be thinking about that in a narrow 4-week window of August and saying, I need people to be in 3 days a week in August, and then 2? Or can you actually say over a period of time, this works out and it balances? So I think that communication of what's possible around roles is important. In some roles, let's be honest, things are not possible. And then I think you've got to think about it and say, okay, are there other things that you can enable somebody to do in a different role where what they need is there? But you won't know as a line manager unless an employee speaks up to you. And I loved Mike's point, and that's what I try to do. Talk about family and talk about the realities of your situation, because when you do, it normalizes it, and then you start to hear it from your own team.
Thank you. That's great, Sam. I've got one here, that perhaps Suzanne might answer for us. I work in a small business where there are 2 business partners who own the business, and they are not and will not become parents. How can they truly understand what being a working parent is like and the challenges that we face?
Well, I think it goes back again to conversation, normalising. I'd like to hope that they are open to be able to talk that through and to understand that actually work is part of life. We've spoken over many years about the term work-life balance, but actually it tends to separate the 2 things in our world. In fact, actually, I prefer to talk about work-life integration, where we're actually managing all the priorities in our lives, including work and meaningful work. And work in this new era, this new industrial era, is much more about partnership. And we bring our values and our skills and our experiences into the workplace. And although there is a transactional relationship here, there's also a human relationship here. So an individual working within a workplace brings and needs to integrate everything. So actually opening that conversation and understanding how best we are able to deliver our skills and our experiences, and to still be able to balance and integrate all the priorities that we have outside of the workplace, is a conversation that I hope that the leaders will be open to, without knowing their response perhaps, and then being able to support that. It's difficult to know how that would go for that individual, but I think opening the conversation and showing how that partnership can work best.
Thank you, Suzanne. I've got another one here for you, actually. It says, Suzanne, you mentioned oh, it jumped. Hold on 1 second. Get it back. I don't know why my screen just jumped. Suzanne, you mentioned a need for autonomy and how this benefits organisations and people. I agree, but sometimes I see managers not applying flex consistently to team members. Do the panel think today's exciting news about flex working will help line managers to navigate conversations about flexi working with their team?
So I think there's probably two questions in there in one. One is around that consistency, and leadership needs to be consistent. And that means just not in flexible working, but consistency actually supports psychologically safe environment. And then there's the legislation piece. So around the legislation piece, it's fantastic to see it. It's absolutely wonderful that it's here. And yes, it should certainly help enormously, if nothing more, to be able to keep bringing that conversation to the forefront. In terms of that consistency and approach, again, I think this really does come back to supporting line managers and leaders with the right tools to be able to lead in a different way. We are in a very different space now in terms of we are so far away now from the science of management, you know, where Henry Ford said, you know, why is it that every time I get a pair of hands, I get a brain attached? We're actually now in an environment where, as I say, there's this partnership happening. And consistency links very much to a need for equity and fairness, but it needs to be a whole team conversation. How do we actually ensure that that team's output, the purpose for which they're there and what they want to be able to deliver on is essential and core to that team's connection, and how can they all deliver their skills into that? Now, that may be that different people have different working arrangements, but if that transparency and the conversation's there, actually we start to connect far deeper, and we start to be able to support each other in that. So it's a consistent approach through the conversation and opening it up, and how we all are here to produce the output, even if some individuals have a slightly different approach to how they're approaching their own work and delivering the skills in. And I think that's a different nuance, and it's a very different way of leading, rather than trying to bring different formal policies across a team. That can create some sense of resentment.
Thank you, Suzanne. I've got another one here. Old values often die hard, and some managers are anti-flex and used to the old school way of doing it. How do we challenge embedded mindsets that some managers still have around flex working? Mike, I don't know if you have any thoughts on challenging embedded mindsets.
That's interesting. I mean, I'm no organisational psychologist myself, but with a fear of kind of repeating ourselves, I think it comes down to just, yeah, literally having conversations about things. And it starts and ends with that. As I said, we have to operate within the kind of the guardrails of the policy environment that we do. And although my remit for joining this, actually, I'm not allowed to talk about kind of specifics of Barclays policies, but obviously there is a set of policies, there's a set of guidance there for line managers to operate within. But if you speak to our HR people, they'll explain that, you know, it doesn't attempt to cater for every scenario, every eventuality, because everyone is different. So the conversation then is fundamental. It's so important to understanding how you work within the legislation and within the set of policies and frameworks and whatever's in place at a given employer. You have to have that conversation, and I think we have to acknowledge that for some colleagues, particularly perhaps in a more junior role, that can be very difficult to approach that subject if they feel perhaps that it's not a supportive environment. But I think unfortunately, you probably just have to steel yourself and really try and really try and get the door open and actually broach the conversation. And you might find that having got over that initial hurdle, it's easier than you thought it would be.
Thanks, Mike. I think we've got time for one last quick question. We've got 2 minutes left. Sam, role modelling, said, thanks, Sam. Role modelling is the key, and permission, sharing examples of reality. What difference has it made to you and your team?
Great question. I think it goes back to that normalising it, you know, so I'm not secretive about how hard this is. You know, I think, you know, and everyone has their different struggle, but anyone who is a parent or part of a, you know, working family in any form is struggling with time. And I'm quite vocal about that. You know, it's that constant wrestle for time. When I first became a parent, I thought I was going to crack this. I'd find those extra 2 hours in a day. Well, guess what? They don't exist. So it is for me about normalising it. I talk about these things quite openly with my team. So, you know, my team know that I had a disastrous year in childcare last year. We had a long-term nanny who was with us for several years. She left us to go and work with another family. Absolute disaster trying to replace her. Literally, I had 5 attempts within 5 months. It was terrible because of the disruption. You know, that's a time thing, but it's a disruption thing. Talking about that, because people, you know, it goes back to what I said before. If you make this look easy, it's not the truth, and it doesn't help anyone. And then, you know, I think being honest and being vocal and asking people that point around, so, you know, what's important to them. I talked about bedtime for one of my team, and for me, you know, children's bedtime's important. It's allowed people to have that voice. Sharing the policies makes it visible to people so they know what they can do. And I think then, for me as the leader of my organization, sending out a note to do that, you know, any leader doing that, you're giving permission again. And therefore it allowed someone in the team to be able to ask to take some of that leave to their manager. And I do think there's a bit of, you've got to kind of legitimize that, create the space for it, make it normal. As a result, I have a very diverse team. You know, when it comes to it, you know, to what difference has it made to my team? A diverse team. So, you know, I have lots of parents in my team. They talk about their experience. Other parents have joined the team, whereas historically, I would tell you, looking at mergers and acquisitions and the way that transactions can be all-consuming, people might have assumed that's not a team I can work in as a parent with childcare, you know, and responsibility. So it goes back to the role modelling, Becca, I think.
Thank you. I love that, your comment about honesty, and same with what I do every day. It's just being honest, and, you know, because it doesn't help anybody to paint a false picture of what any part of life is like.
I wish I had known about your network in my first year of being a parent, is all I can say. Yeah.
I'm going to hand back to Jane to wrap today up for us. But thank you so much to Mike and to Sam and to Suzanne. Sorry, it was a mouthful. Thanks, guys.
Hi, excuse me. Hi, everybody. That was an absolutely fascinating conversation. There are a couple of things that really, really struck me. One was that you all have had what one of our ex-trustees now calls a squiggly career. And it's absolutely fascinating to see that. I wonder how much your flexibility in your career has impacted, and vice versa, on your need for flexibility in the roles that you do. Suzanne, I love work-life integration. Work-life balance has always annoyed the heck out of me, because there's not a lot about my life that is necessarily balanced in any one day. So I'm definitely going to carry on using that. And the other thing that I found so interesting was that actually what all of you are doing is what you've mentioned, which is role modeling. But here at Working Families, we like to use the phrase real modeling. That idea of I'm trying to do the very best that I can, and I'm going to do it in the way that I do it. And hopefully that will encourage everybody to be able to do it in their own way. And yes, leading from the front seems to be something that all of you are doing in everything that you do. So Thank you so much, Sam, Mike, Suzanne, and Becca. Brilliant to have you with us. Really enjoying your input. And yes, life is not perfect. Life is not necessarily easy. And so finally, if anybody would like to have the benefit of the brilliant Suzanne Jacobs working with them in terms of the training that she offers, do feel free to drop our employer services team a quick line and they will get back to you. And yes, I think this has been an extraordinary National Work-Life Week. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. There is more to go, but I'm going to a yoga retreat tomorrow. So I'm definitely integrating something into my life, whether that's going to be painful twists or a very pleasant lying down and doing not very much. I'm not sure yet. Thank you all. It was absolutely brilliant conversation today, led by people who really are showing up to do what they believe in. So thank you all. And I'm going to leave you with an extra 30 seconds of your day. Thanks very much, everybody. Thank you and goodbye.